4:30 in the morning. 1,200 German guns opened fire at once, and along a quiet stretch of the Western Front, the earth begins to tear itself apart. The bombardment is heard 100 miles away. It is the 21st of February, 1916, the first dawn of the bloodiest year of the Great War. Before it is over, 2 battles, Verdun and the Somme, will swallow more than 2 million men. This is the year the war became an industry of death. By the end of 1914, the war of movement had died in the mud. From the North Sea to the Swiss border, 700 kilometers of trenches cut Europe in two. Barbed wire, machine guns and artillery made every attack a massacre. In 1915, France alone lost over 1 million men killed, wounded or captured for gains measured in meters. Germany held the high ground and 1/10 of France's soil. For the Allies, the only way out was through. But Germany's Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, drew a colder conclusion. Stop trying to break the line. Choose instead a place France could never abandon, and bleed her army to death defending it. The place he chose was Verdun, an ancient fortress city on the river Meuse, ringed by hills and 19 major forts. Beaumont, the largest, was believed to be the strongest fortress on earth. But Verdun sat in a dangerous salient, with German lines on 3 sides, fed by a single light railway and 1 narrow road. And after 1915, the French had quietly stripped its forts of most of their guns. Opposite, the entire German Fifth Army, under Crown Prince Wilhelm, massed 1,200 guns behind a front of barely 13 kilometers. The code name was Gericht, the place of judgment. At dawn on February the 21st, the storm broke. For 9 hours, 1 million shells fell upon the French lines. Whole forests were shredded, villages ceased to exist. Then came the storm troops, clearing what remained with a new weapon, the flamethrower. In the Bois des Cours, Colonel Émile Driant and his light infantry held for 2 days before he fell, rifle in hand. By the 25th of February, the Germans had advanced 5 kilometers. And that afternoon, a handful of Brandenburgers walked into Fort Douaumont, the strongest fortress on earth, and took it without firing a shot. Church bells rang across Germany. Verdun seemed ready to fall. That night, France gave the defense to General Philippe Pétain, and the front hardened around a single vow: they shall not pass. Pétain understood artillery, and he understood supply. Every remaining fort would be held. Every German assault would be answered by massed guns from the flanks. And down one narrow road, soon christened the Voie Sacrée, the Sacred Way, a truck passed every 14 seconds, day and night, 90,000 men and 50,000 tons of shells and supplies every single week. Pétain rotated his divisions through the furnace before they broke. By summer, 2 soldiers of every 3 in the French army had served at Verdun. This was no longer a battle for a city, it was France itself. Falkenhayn's plan was working, but it bled both armies alike. In March, to silence the French guns west of the Meuse, the battle spread to 2 hills. Le Mort-Homme, the Dead Man, and Hill 304, pounded until the summit stood meters lower than before the war. In June, Fort Vaux fell after a week of fighting in pitch-dark corridors. Its garrisons surrendered only when the last of the water was gone. The ruined village of Fleury changed hands 16 times, and on July the 12th, German troops reached Fort Souville, within sight of Verdun itself. It was the high water mark of the battle. They would come no closer. Verdun could only be saved by another battle. The Allies had long planned a joint offensive astride the river Somme, and as Verdun devoured the French reserves, it became, by necessity, a British battle. General Sir Douglas Haig commanding, Rawlinson's 4th Army to make the assault, the French attacking south of the river. Everything rested on the guns. For 7 days, more than 1.5 million shells pounded the German line between Gommecourt and the Somme. The wire would be cut, the dugouts crushed, and the infantry, so many of them, Volunteers of Kitchener's new army would simply walk across and take the ruins. That, at least, was the plan. 0 hour. 7:30 in the morning, July the 1st. Whistles blew and 120,000 men climbed out of their trenches into the summer light. But the bombardment had failed. The wire was uncut, and the German machine gunners, who had survived 9 meters down in the chalk, reached their parapets first. At Beaumont-Hamel, the Newfoundland regiment lost more than 700 men in half an hour. Only in the south, beside the French, did the line truly break. By nightfall, the British Army had suffered 57,470 casualties, 19,240 of them dead. It remains the bloodiest single day in British military history. There would be no breakthrough, only the grind. Through July and August, the offensive decayed into a war for woods and villages. Mametz Wood, Delville Wood, Pozières, where the Australians suffered 23,000 casualties in 6 weeks. Then, on September the 15th, near the village of Flers, a new sound crossed no man's land. Of 49 tanks sent forward, barely half reached the start line. But the first tanks in history crawled over the German wire, and for a morning, the front simply moved. 2 kilometers later, it stuck fast. Autumn rains turned the chalk to glue, and on November the 18th, the Battle of the Somme ended in sleet, barely 10 kilometers from where it had begun. At Verdun, the tide had already turned. The Somme and Russia's offensive in the east forced Germany to strip the Meuse front of guns and men. In late August, Falkenhayn was dismissed. Hindenburg and Ludendorff shut his offensive down. Then France struck back. Under Generals Nivelle and Mangin, the infantry advanced behind a new science, the creeping barrage, a moving wall of shellfire rolling just ahead of the attack. On October the 24th, Fort Douaumont was retaken in a single day. Fort Vaux followed within days. By December the 18th, the French line stood almost where it had been in February. 10 months, 300 days and nights, for nothing and for everything. Now count the cost. Verdun, some 377,000 French casualties, 337,000 German. More than 700,000 men on a battlefield of a few square miles for a front line that finished where it began. The Somme, over 420,000 British and Commonwealth casualties to 200,000 French, and perhaps 500,000 German. Historians still argue. Taken together, more than 2 million men in a single year for 10 kilometers of mud. Around Verdun, 9 villages were wiped so completely from the earth that most were never rebuilt. France keeps them on the map to this day with the inscription "Mort pour la France," died for France. Neither battle produced a victory worth the name, yet 1916 changed the war. Verdun became the sacred symbol of French endurance and a wound that would reopen in the mutinies of the following spring. The Somme destroyed the innocence of Kitchener's volunteer Britain, but it forged a modern army. The creeping barrage, the tank, the aeroplane, working with the guns. The tools that won the war in 1918 were learned in its mud, and one German officer left the truest verdict. The Somme, he wrote, was the muddy grave of the German field army. Today, the ossuary at Douaumont holds the bones of 130,000 men, French and German together, who could never be told apart. At Thiepval, a great arch carries the names of 72,000 British soldiers who have no grave at all. 2 battles, 10 months, 2 million casualties. The Arithmetic of Attrition, written across the fields of France in the year 1916.